Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grit and Glamour. I'm your host, Ruby Veridiano, and today is the last episode of 2020. I can't think of a better way to end this year and to end season 2 of this show than inviting a very special guest who has played such a tremendous role in transforming my life. Today's show features my dear friend, spiritual mentor, and academic/sociologist, Dr. Kumi Endo. Kumi is currently the COO of MedToLab, where she works to make healthcare more equitable and more accessible through innovative medical education. She's also a former instructor of Buddhist Thought at Hofstra University. Kumi is a lifelong practitioner of Buddhism, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about what everyday people, regardless of your spiritual path or belief, can take from Buddhism to incorporate into your own life so that you too can transform and change your inner world so that we can heal the outer world. And no, Kumi is not in fashion, but the universal truths that we're going to be sharing on today's conversation, I feel are relevant to any change maker in fashion and beyond. Lastly, I know that this year has been so tough and so challenging for so many people. So it was important for me to anchor us in hope and light as we end the year and prepare to build a new one. So without further ado, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome onto the show, Kumi Endo.
Hi.
Hi, Kumi. How are you?
I'm good, Ruby.
Tell us where you're broadcasting in from.
I'm currently in Arlington, Virginia.
And how's the weather there?
Gorgeous. Not a cloud in the sky.
Well, I'm so happy that you've joined us from where you are. It's such a privilege to have you and to, I've learned so much from you, and now I get to share some of your wisdom to my community. You are such a bright light to me, Kumi, and I'm so excited that folks can get to listen. But let's start by having you give us a little bit of context to your own practice. Can you tell us about your core beliefs within Buddhism?
Sure. Well, gosh, the core beliefs really are about being able to push through every single day and all the things that happen in that day in the most powerful and empowering and compassionate way. I mean, that's the core of it.
Yeah.
But the the heart of it is like really believing in yourself and making decisions, like determining what you want to do in that day, what you want to do in that week, how you want to be, in that year, and not giving up on that.
Yes. And I love what you said about deciding, because I feel like there's not enough emphasis on how important decision making is.
Yeah.
Can you help me elaborate the power that decisions have in our lives?
Yeah. Buddhism is all about cause and effect. And there's many different kinds of causes you can make in your life. But you can boil it down to like 3 types of causes. And that is, what you say, you can make a cause in your speech, what you physically do, and also what you think or believe. And those are the ways that you make a cause. And, when you make a cause, an effect is automatically attached to it.
Right.
So if you say, thank you, then the effect is somebody saying you're welcome. Yeah, or somebody giving you a smile, right? When you physically harm somebody, the effect is probably you'll get harmed right back, or you will, see some blood.
Yeah.
But the effect of deciding, believing, thinking, that you don't immediately see, but it's there. The effect is there. You see it actually in if you are paying attention, you see that it comes up in your relationships. It comes up in the way that the environment interacts with you. You see it in the way that like your body interacts with you. I mean, thought and deciding and believing, all that is very invisible, but you have very visible results, effects
Absolutely.
from that cause that you make.
Absolutely. And especially because we're all essentially one with everything in the universe. So anything that we decide reverberates as a force
Yeah.
throughout. Yeah. So, Kumi, as you know, this is normally a fashion podcast, really about helping to inspire change makers in the fashion industry. But I really wanted to have this conversation because I think that change making starts from within us.
Yeah.
Can you and again, because I also want there to be a lot of lessons that we can help to share to others regardless of spiritual belief or spiritual path. One of the things that I think is a universal truth is the connection between inner transformation and world transformation. Can you explain the connection between this?
Yeah, absolutely. When, like you said, every single life in the whole universe is interconnected. I mean, that's the framework that an entire, Buddhist philosophy works off of. And if if you change your kind of way of being, for example, from one of suffering to one of strength or wisdom or compassion, that not only affects your internal self or your body, but it also affects the people around you and even the physical environment you're in. And just to give you an example, for example, if even a building structure, right? Depending on who's the one who owns it or occupies it, the entire feeling of the structure changes.
Mm,
If somebody who is out to hurt themselves and hurt other people, they might use one building structure to create like a prison, or to hurt other people,
yeah.
um, like
To
a
dominate.
yeah, to dominate other people. But if you have somebody who is based in compassion or wisdom, not only is that person just carrying that in themselves, the entire environment changes. That structure reflects, like a shelter, or a place, an orphanage, or some place that really provides protection and treasuring of other people. So in a way, the fastest way to change the external environment is to change each individual person's way of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause it immediately is reflected in that physical environment and the social environment.
Yeah. And I think even on a macro level, I think it's so hard and difficult to project good things or to do good things outside of yourself if you don't feel good within you. Right. Like I feel like when you're really stressed or when you're feeling anxious and you're feeling really, you know, overwhelmed with life, it's hard for you to give and pour into other people.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's so hard to value somebody else
Mm,
if you haven't been practicing valuing yourself.
absolutely.
Yeah. So how
100%.
can we give compassion to other people if you haven't been doing that for yourself?
Mm,
It doesn't mean like condoning, things that are harmful. It means like really doing what's true to yourself, and cherishing your life, cherishing your time, and that bleeds into cherishing the people in your life.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that because I think it makes it so accessible, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
it's so overwhelming to think about how we can change the world, but well, let's start by figuring out how we can change the way that we feel about ourselves. So, Kumi, from your experience, what are some concrete steps that you feel people can take to start their journey towards transforming their inner life?
Well, one is deciding. Like you were saying earlier, you have to decide. Like, first of all, do I want to be happy? Or do I want to be okay with learning to cope with suffering?
Mm,
Those are two very different things, right? And so you can actually have the audacity to decide, I want to be absolutely happy.
yeah,
And just making that decision, which actually takes a lot of courage to make, just making that decision, like, I want to be happy, like so happy,
right,
very simple, right? Is actually a tremendous action you took for your life
mm,
in that moment.
right,
Your whole body heard it. Your whole heart heard that, and so things can start moving towards that direction because you decided that's where my destination is.
Yeah.
That's the very first step, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also one thing that I would like to add to that is just in the decision of happiness is deciding also to be grateful for everything that you already have. Because I think as human nature, we tend to naturally focus on what we lack. And that happens more naturally for a lot of people than to actually focus on what's already there. And I think that's such a good compliment to the feeling of joy is just gratitude and recognition for what's already around us.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we have to discuss like, well, what is happiness, right? And like you said, it's not about like having more, right? Or being in a different place. If you're saying I want to become happy, what you're really saying is I want to have the strength and the gratitude, and the compassion that
Mm,
allows me to be undefeated in any circumstance and be
yeah.
able to create, joy, be able to create value out of
Yeah.
any ingredient that I'm working with.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And I love the concept of self-compassion. I think we forget a lot to be compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're so hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think practicing self-compassion on the journey towards happiness, you're not going to get it right every time. You're not going to feel joyful every day, but just having patience with self, I think is such an important lesson.
Yeah.
Kumi, as you know, a lot of people have suffered many losses this year. And I think even for you, like, would you be open to sharing maybe some of the experiences that you've had this year and how you've managed to still face what seems like bad news in a spirit of optimism? And maybe through your example, we can help people manage all of these seemingly challenging situations still with a winning spirit.
Right. Yeah. Um, you know, uh, yeah, absolutely. So what I experienced this year is what many people experience, which is, the loss of job and income and health insurance. And I have two daughters, and so it's when in the face of financial hardship, it becomes really a sense of debilitation. Starts to surface. But what was very different for me was that as a context in the beginning of the year, like with every start of the year, I decide on what I want for that year. And this year I had decided I really want to cast off this tendency to doubt myself all the time and to seek validation in my environment all the time that okay, I'm in the right track or I'm doing the right thing. Like I always have that tendency to do that. So this year I really wanted to I decided this is the year where I'm going to cast that off and I could really believe in myself and believe that I can create value and contribute to the world no matter what.
Mm,
And so, because that decision was there in the back of my mind, when we faced our financial hardship this year due to COVID, um, I could remember wait a minute, I made that decision. That's the promise I made to myself. And now I'm being tested because it's easy to keep a promise to yourself when all the circumstances align to help you keep that promise,
yeah,
right?
when everything is going well, it's so easy to feel optimistic.
Exactly. Exactly. Optimism is easy when things are going well. But the true test of optimism is when things are not going well,
Mm,
right? And that's when you choose, oh, do I get to test out my resolve now? Or, and it's going to take courage, but you just encourage yourself. You say, like, this is the time I have to stay true to my belief and true to my decision, the original
mhm.
decision I made, and not be swayed by the things that are happening at me or happening to me.
Absolutely.
And then that human indomitable spirit really does end up coming through. And as long as you don't give up, you will find victory. you will be able to find that, wow, I had this strength in me this whole time. I had these, this richness of human relationships this whole time. Like that really comes out when that the often in Buddhism, the metaphor of a sword being forged in really intense heat and fire is used to show how a human spirit gets strengthened through adversity.
Yes.
And that adversity is necessary to, when you're pounding that sword with heat, or when you're pounding the iron with the heat, all the impurities that are inherent in the iron surface and get evaporated. And that's kind of what adversity does to the human spirit. Like it's really pounding you hard, but you're able to really overcome those weaknesses
Hmm.
through that adversity, and then you come out as this sword that can cut through anything.
Yes, I
There's
love that.
no other way to get to become that sword.
Yes, I love that because I also feel like adversity is in itself a blessing because you don't find what you're made of
Yeah,
until you are forced
yeah,
to figure out how you can create that strength. And I
yeah,
think the most compassionate and the most beautiful people that I've met are people who have overcome adversity and some form of suffering to
yeah.
become victorious over it.
Yeah, that's really what I want, like, people to remember is, like, if you're going through hardship and suffering, you also have to know that that's also part of your mission in life, meaning it's not your mission to suffer, it's your mission to overcome the suffering, because you are gonna be such a valuable presence in every single person you meet. You're just by being you and having overcome that hardship, you're a living encouragement to
Yeah.
other people. You're gonna emit hope to other people that you can overcome adversity in that way.
Yeah, and you create a depth in your own human spirit to
Yeah,
be able to have a better understanding and to have a better connection with human life.
right.
Because if you've never suffered before, and you want to change the world, how can you relate to people if you haven't yet had your humanity tested? And
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Who do you want on your team? Somebody who knows what adversity feels like, and who can absolutely empathize with you, or somebody who has no clue, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
you're that much more valuable for all your adversities.
Yes, I
Yeah.
love that. And Kumi, what would you say to someone who feels like they just can't win? How can they establish this winning spirit regardless of what's happening around them?
Right, right, right. That's such a good question. You know, um, yeah, I had a thought when you were saying this earlier, but when you're in your earlier question, but so if you feel like you just can't win and you're really being beat down, sorry, I'm having a brain fog right now.
No worries. Well, actually, I had this feeling not that long ago.
Yeah,
I was thinking about how actually what I did this year was I listed all of the things that I thought I failed at.
yeah,
And then I listed it on one side of the paper. And on
mm,
the other side of the paper, I listed all of the things that I learned from those failures. And
right.
those lessons were actually things that allowed me to win. It's just a shift in perspective.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think a lot of times when people are feeling like they are constantly being thrown at
yeah,
the mercy of all of these losses. I
yeah,
think one thing would just be to figure out how can you shift your perspective to look at it from a different vantage point. It
yeah.
might not make you feel better right away, but I think that it's just a small shift, you know?
You know what it is? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took me 13 years to get my doctorate degree, and it was such a long winter, but one is you have to believe that winter always turns into spring. There's no such, world where spring goes back into winter, you know? Like
Yeah.
winter has to turn into spring. And one thing is that when you're down, you're absolutely right that it's a mindset. It really helped me to
There,
really
there's your doctorate degree.
um yeah, that's right. And my daughter and my parents. You know, one thing that is to have the spirit, even though circumstances look exact opposite of what you want, you say to yourself, I'm already winning. Things are already going in the best possible way for me. And that might sound ridiculous, but actually that does create this momentum for victory. Like
Yeah.
if when things are really at rock bottom, you're saying to yourself, you know, actually things are moving in the right direction. Things are already going in the best direction for me.
Yeah.
That creates victory, you know? You don't find victory, you're creating it
Yeah.
in those moments
Yeah.
by taking on that kind of mentality.
Yeah. And I think, again, just going back to the point that we were talking about earlier, is that there is something to be gained from every adversity.
Yeah.
So, trusting the process, trusting the natural timing of life, and then also trying to pick out, anytime you're in a space where you're feeling really challenged,
Yeah.
asking yourself, what am I learning from this?
Right.
How am I growing in this moment right now?
Right. Right.
Um, and then taking stock of what felt like failures, but then actually were setups, right? Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
every setback is just a setup for success.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, the next question I have, Kumi, is a pretty important question, but it's about relentless optimism versus toxic positivity, right? Because
Right.
especially you grew up in Japan, but you've been living in the U.S. for a while now, so
Yeah.
you do know that our American culture is very much around optimism, but sometimes it can
Right.
lean on toxic positivity. So how do you personally strike a balance between those two?
I think that, the most important thing is to have wisdom and authenticity. If you're developing wisdom within, you're able to see through phenomena. So what I mean by that is with toxic positivity, it comes from this uh, inability to see exactly what is going on, where the source of suffering is, and you're just kind of like trying to slap on something on top of it without really addressing what is the source of suffering. So there's inauthenticity there. It's very disempowering, actually. It's not very encouraging at all, right? um, but optimism is, you're not slapping anything over the suffering.
Yeah.
You're looking at the suffering and you're acknowledging that it's there, and you're not rejecting it. You're not saying that's bad. It's bad to have suffering. You're not doing that at all. You're saying, I'm suffering. This is what it is right now. It's the reality. And I have the power to transform this very suffering into the same amount of joy.
Yeah.
Not like you're going to negate something or delete something or take something away. You're going to transform the very nature of that suffering into something that causes tremendous joy and appreciation in your life.
Yes.
That's optimism. Yeah.
Yes.
Fundamentally, it's being able to believe in yourself with the suffering there. Yeah.
Yeah. And what that reminds me of, Coombs, is like the metaphor of the lotus flower. Can you share
Yeah.
that metaphor?
Yes, it's a metaphor frequently used in Buddhism, but it's the idea that first of all, the beautiful lotus flower, only blossoms in muddy water. It can't survive in pristine, clear water. So that's a metaphor for our universe-sized life, very powerful. What in Buddhism is called Buddhahood or Buddha nature, where that can only flower actually in the middle of messy everyday life with all the messy relationships and all the conflicts and things that happen. It only has an opportunity to blossom in there because
Right.
that's the adversity, right? That's what makes you go to the point of deciding I need to bring out something greater than this from within my life,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
So then you blossom, you get an opportunity to blossom that lotus. But also it's a flower that seeds and bears fruit at the same time, produces cause and effect at the same time. Yeah, so it's a metaphor for the simultaneity of cause and effect, meaning what you decide, right? The cause that you make already has the effect, that beautiful flower effect
Mm,
together in that decision. You're not just, making an empty decision. Every time you believe something, you decide something, the effect is already there. And with time, it will manifest.
right.
Yeah.
Like the muddier the water,
Yeah.
the more beautiful the flower.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And going back to your other question, I guess toxic positivity would be like, there is no muddy, the water's not muddy at all. You're just kind of covering it with something. Whereas in this case, you're really saying, yeah, it's so muddy. And in this, I'm gonna create the most beautiful flower, thanks to all the mud, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, recognizing it. I
Yeah.
love that. Now, I think a lot of where people slip up is when things do get really hard and they have a hard time believing, right? Like they can't see the light and they don't believe because they can't see the light, they don't believe in the light. Do you have any from your experience or your own personal way of dealing with cultivating faith? Do you have any advice for people to have more conviction and to develop that faith muscle?
Oof, yeah, I mean, for me, I have a daily Buddhist practice and an amazing Buddhist community. It's called the Soka Gakkai, and I guess your viewers can check it out. But for me, that community and that daily practice of chanting, which is what I do, really helps me,
Yeah.
in those moments to
Yeah.
develop the conviction when it's not there.
I
Yeah.
think what I like about that is a concept of a ritual and just
Yeah.
having something consistent that grounds and anchors you. So, for those who may not practice Buddhism, maybe that means prayer, maybe that means journaling,
Right.
maybe that means creating affirmations for
Yeah.
yourself, maybe
Yeah.
that means meditation or gratitude, right? Like, gratitude is such a big part of my life because as soon as my default lens on life landed on gratitude, then instead of being so panicked when something goes wrong, I
Yeah.
am defaulting to, okay, but how can I still be thankful for this situation?
That's amazing.
Um, and then I think also just anchoring ourselves in just more self love, like what are the ways that we can practice more self love? And as you said, self compassion.
Yeah.
I think those are things that we can ritualize in our daily life that
Yeah.
little by little will
Yeah.
build that belief system or
Yeah.
that conviction.
Yeah, exactly. Just telling yourself like I have the power of the entire universe inside of me.
Yes.
I am as worthy as the entire, universe. And just every time you feel yourself exactly, especially when you're rejecting yourself or beating yourself up over something, to just take a pause and say, I'm first of all, I don't have the right to do that to my life, just like I
Yeah.
don't have the right to do that to somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And what I have inside of me is something as powerful and as compassionate as the entire universe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kumi, you also, as I mentioned earlier on to introduce you, you do work at Lab. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, what you're doing, and how does your faith and your Buddhist practice influence the work that you do?
Sure. Yes. Our company focuses on offering a platform for this really innovative type of medical education that focuses on helping doctors and nurses develop the ability to know how to think rather than just getting them to what they know.
Mm,
Meaning that it teaches doctors and nurses how to be self-aware of their own biases when they're making clinical decisions, how to think through something with scientific maturity instead of just testing them on like memory recall of like
yeah.
medical facts. Yeah, and
Yeah.
the objective is this holistic type of education that's accessible will give the patients who have these doctors a much more equitable experience, a much more low cost experience. And the way that this, my kind of Buddhist faith influences that is, whenever there's a hardship or a setback in the process of establishing a company, I can always remember what this is all for, and the whole purpose is to contribute to as many lives as possible. And that always kind of just makes everything very, very clear as to what needs to be done right now. And I can find, I can persevere through any of the hardships that might come because of that clear objective that is based in my faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, as again, we've had such a tough year. I
Yeah.
think people are ready to create a new life or a new chapter for the next year, but we obviously can't control our external circumstances. So, from your personal experience and practice, what would you, if someone out there was to say, hey, how can I tap into my inner source of strength and light? What would be your last words of advice for them as we end this show, to help prepare us all to step into a more collective healing process for the world that we're living in?
Yes. Well, I have a chant that I use every day. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's really the name of your universe-sized life inside. I would say try, chanting the name of your universe-sized life, and to make the decision that you will become happy no matter what.
Yes.
You will become happy no matter what, and that you will fulfill your dreams no matter what.
Yes, I love the practice of the decision. I don't think that people recognize that decision is in itself a way to stamp your life force. Like what? Like I'm gonna be strong and I'm gonna decide this no matter what. And I think that you're right. Like once you make that decision, then everything kind of moves around that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's already a victory if you can make that decision.
Well, thank you so much, Kumi, for being on the show, for sharing your story with us and your wisdom with us. For those out there who want to learn more about Buddhism, where can they go?
Yes, a wonderful website called buddhability.org. Buddhability, .org. I guess you can put it in the thing. But that's a fantastic content for anybody interested.
Yes. And what if they want to get in touch with you or the work that you're doing? Is there a way that they could find you?
Yeah, they could go to they could have my email, I guess. Med2lab.com is our company website, but also I'm on Instagram at Kumiko Endo. And I can get direct mail there.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Kumi. And I hope for all of you who are watching, I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation with Kumi and that you've learned something, and that I hope that this inspires you to firmly and powerfully decide on the future that you are about to have, because there's so many ways that we can overcome and to also create the world that we want, but we have to start by feeling good within ourselves first. I think that is also really the spirit, right, of like all the grit that it takes behind the glamour. It's all really the same metaphors. The muddy water with the lotus flower, it's the grit behind the glamour. And I think a lot of times when we are achieving our objectives, achieving our goals, or just wanting to win in our daily life, we have to have that grit and not be afraid of the hard work that it takes to really create that beauty around us. And we all have the power to do it. So thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Grit and Glamour, for being with me throughout this year. I hope to see you back in 2021. And once again, here's to all the grit behind the glamour. Thank you all so much. See you next year. Bye.